Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me in the locker room this evening. I'm Alan Locher. This is the first in a series of shows I'm calling Conversations with Alan, and I will share a little bit more later on in the show about my reasons for wanting to start this series. My first guest tonight is someone I've known for a number of years through our mutual work in the entertainment industry. In the last few years, we have reconnected over the parallel threads in both of our families' history. Yvette Manessis Corporon is an Emmy Award winning writer, producer, and international best-selling author. She currently is a senior producer for the syndicated news program Extra, and her first book, When the Cyprus Whispers, a novel, was released in 2014 and is an international bestseller that has been translated into 16 languages. And the nonfiction book she wrote, Something Beautiful Happened, a story of survival and courage in the face of evil, was released in 2017 and has also been translated into 3 languages. I've read both books and just finished Something Beautiful Happened for a second time in preparation for our show tonight. I definitely encourage you to pick up both books. In her second book, Something Beautiful Happened, Yvette set out to track down the descendants of the Jewish family her grandmother helped hide on a Greek island during World War II, 70 years after the war had ended. During her journey, she discovered a new way to understand tragedy, forgiveness, and the power of kindness. Please have a look at this video, and then we'll start our conversation.
There was intensive bombing in the western part of Greece.
There were about 2,000 Jews in Corfu at the time. The Nazis came in, they literally ripped them from their homes.
They didn't know that they were going to a death camp.
My grandmother told me that everyone here risked their lives to save this family.
Despite the fact that the Nazis went door to door hunting for escaped Jews,
Nobody gave them up.
not one person on the island gave up the secret,
They closed their mouths.
and the family survived.
But we didn't really know what became of them after that.
I grew up listening to my grandmother's story. I wanted to finish telling the story that she had started. I wanted to find this family.
I was told by many, many people, you're never going to find them. It became an obsession.
I think our grandmothers may have known each other. That's Amoss, that's definitely him. Amazing.
It's okay, it's okay. No worries.
Everything had come full circle. 3 days later, everything changed.
We now know the identity of 2 of the 3 shooting victims.
On April 13th, my 14-year-old nephew, Reet, and his grandfather were killed by a madman shouting Heil Hitler at a JCC in Kansas.
Dr. Corporon died at the scene. Reet later died at the hospital.
During the Holocaust, my grandmother helped save the life of a Jewish family. And now in Kansas today, our family is devastated because someone thought that 2 members of our family were Jewish.
Because of your hate and your evil, you murdered my dad and my son. But they picked the wrong family because we're not going to stand for it.
We want something good to come out of this.
אני מרגיש שאנחנו משפחה.
It's a story of finding the light in the darkest moment. Because otherwise the darkness will win, and we can't let that happen.
Please welcome to the locker room, Yvette Manessis Corporon, my friend.
Hey!
Hello.
Hey, Alan, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Every time I watch that hairs on my,
I know my kids have an over under of like how long it takes mom to cry when I start talking about this story. And it's like how many years later, and nothing. It's still it's incredibly powerful and emotional.
Well, that's it. And there's so much, because you were sharing some things when we were talking backstage. But for you, when did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
I always knew I wanted to somehow be in communications. I started out writing for news. So I was a news writer, very different skill set. And as a television producer, what I did for a living was interview other people who had achieved and fulfilled their dreams. Oscar winners, Emmy winners, red carpets. I've seen you on many red carpets, presidents, politicians, people who have achieved their dreams. And I remember there was one point in my career about maybe 15 years ago, I had just interviewed Carrie Underwood right after she won American Idol, actually. And I saw this young girl, and she was so vibrant and full of life and just joy emanating from her. And I said, I want to know what that feels like. I want to know what it feels like to live my own dream, not just talk to other people about theirs, but what does it mean to sort of fulfill my dream, and what is my dream? And I'd always kind of dabbled, like so many people, of, could you write a book? Do I have a book in me? And I realized kind of that day after that interview that I wanted to chase my own dream too. And that's when I sat down and attempted to write a book, which evolved years later into When the Cyprus Whispers, which, as you said in your intro, how lucky was I? My first book was, received in such a beautiful way.
And it is such a beautiful story. Will you share a little bit about the story?
Sure. So my first book is a novel called When the Cyprus Whispers, and it is inspired by my relationship with my grandmother, my Greek grandmother, my Yaya, who lived with us. I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, and I grew up listening to my grandmother tell me stories of what life was like for her in Greece on this tiny little provincial island where she lived. This island is called Arakusa, and it is the northwesternmost point of Greece. We like to say that it's kind of like a speck of dust on the map, when you can even find it on the map. And so
I'm so glad you said the name first, because I was
Arakusa. It's a law. It's Greek.
Yeah.
So a lot of vowels, a lot of S's. So my grandmother and I were very close. And she loved to tell me what life was like on this provincial, primitive, Greek island. There were no cars, no paved roads, no doctors, no electricity at the time. My grandmother was uneducated. She was, for the most part, illiterate. And yet, everyone was poor, but it didn't matter. They didn't even know they were poor because everyone was poor. And one of the stories she liked to tell me was how during the war, there was a Jewish man who was a tailor. His name was Savas Israel, and he owned a tailor shop on the main island of Corfu. So when the islanders, including my grandmother, wanted a new article or needed a new article of clothing, they would cobble together their drachmas, take a boat to the mainland, down to the Jewish quarter, where Savas Israel would make beautiful clothing for them. And so through working with him through the years, they became close. He became friendly with many of the islanders, including my grandmother. And he and there were 3 daughters who were working with him, became part of the extended Arakusa family. And my grandmother told me that during World War II, when the Nazis were occupying Corfu, Savas and his girls managed to escape the roundup. There were 2,000 Jews in the Jewish community of Corfu. They were Greek Jews. They were, I like to say they were as Greek as my own family, but the Nazis didn't see it that way. Of the 2,000 Jews, 1,800 were rounded up and sent to their deaths at Auschwitz. Several managed to, I think 121 came back from Auschwitz. They survived. And several managed to escape the roundup, some hiding in the mountains, some being hidden by their Greek Christian friends. Among them was Savas Israel, who he and his daughters, who lived actually, I went back to the municipal archives and found where they lived and mapped it. So he and his family lived just outside the Jewish quarter. So that explains why he was able to escape the roundup. He wasn't in the immediate center when the Nazis came and rounded everyone up at gunpoint on the morning of June 9th, 1944. He had that little extra time by being a few blocks away. So he and his family managed to escape to Arakusa, where my grandmother and the islanders all worked together to take them in and hide them from the Nazis. So I grew up listening to this story, and this story became the seed for my novel, when the Cyprus Whispers, because, I asked so many people, how do I write a book? What's the first thing I should do? What's your advice? And everyone said, write what you know. Anyone who asked me about, I want to write a book, here's the deal. Write what you know. Find a story that is uniquely yours. You can do all the research. That's not to say that research isn't wonderful and important. You can research something and write a beautiful book. But when you write what you know, a story that is uniquely yours, you bring a certain life and breath to it. And so I thought about that. I was like, okay, well, what story is uniquely mine? What do I know more than anyone? And I was like, oh, okay, I know what it is to be a daughter of Greek immigrants and have this beautiful relationship with my grandmother. And now that my grandmother has passed away, to feel tremendous guilt for not having paid closer attention to these stories. And so that was the seed for my book, When the Cyprus Whispers.
And it is amazing that you did take that whole story and fictionalized it.
Yes. Because I didn't have enough information. I had no choice.
Right. But it's still amazing. And then the book was released, and you had a book signing at a historic synagogue in New York City. And you say that was a turning point in your life. Can you explain how so? And I know your dad was there as well at that time for the book signing. Can you talk about?
Sure. So my dad was there. Now, as I was writing, and let's go back a moment, because we talked about, I fictionalized my grandmother's story, was because I had no choice, because there was no information. I started asking people, so what happened? Did you hear, what happened to Savas and his girls? I knew that they'd survived the war. I knew some details about how they survived and the lengths that my grandmother and the islanders would go to hide and save them when the Nazis came searching. But that was it. There was nothing else.
To go back as well, what you're talking about though, but as a child, you didn't fully pay attention to it either, right? And that's why.
And that was the turning point for me, is realizing, and I say this all the time, it's the moment that I became a mother, right? When I first held my daughter, my firstborn, Christiana, in my arms, my grandmother, one of the stories she would tell me is how at night, Savas's daughters, who she was very close with, they would leave their hiding place. During the day, they were hidden because they were afraid that, number one, someone might spot them and turn them into the Nazis. And number two, if there were Nazis on the island, they might see them and know that they were not Greek Christians, but Jews, because they knew that people had escaped and they were searching for them. They were so bloodthirsty that they would travel this tiny remote island looking for escaped Jews. But my grandmother would tell me she remembered the Nazis in our home, tiny home, ransacking, searching, screaming, where are the Jews? We know you're hiding Jews. We'll murder you. We'll murder your children. We'll burn down this entire island if we find you're hiding or helping Jews. And despite that, my grandmother not only continued to help them, but everyone else on the island kept the story to themselves and didn't give up the story of Savas Israel. So every night, Savas's daughters would leave their hiding place, go to my grandmother's house, knock on the door. She would open the door, let them in, give them food that she had saved from them, taking food from her own children's plates to feed her friends. And they would stay up all night sewing. They taught my grandmother how to sew and sharing stories. And so I remembered listening to these stories thinking, wow, this is really cool. And then going off to hang out with my friends, all right, thanks, guy, I'll see you later. And it wasn't until I became a mother that I was like, whoa, wait a minute. She took food from her own children's plates. Meanwhile, people were dying of starvation all across Greece to feed another woman's children. Wait a minute. The Nazis said they would murder her and her children, and she still opened the door and let them in? I was like, wait a minute. Would I do that? Here I am holding my new baby in my apartment in Brooklyn. Some dude knocked on the door and said, open up. Or if you're hiding anyone, I'm going to murder your child. Would I do that? Would I take that chance? And it was kind of in that moment that I was overcome with this tremendous guilt. And I've shared this story so many times, and this story is not unique, right? It's I know that your parents have an extraordinary story, and yet did you really pay close attention when you were a child? Mm-hmm. So you don't realize this, right? Until you have your own breadth of life experience to put what happens in context.
It's so true, because I pieced a lot together, sadly, after I had a lot, but I pieced a lot together after they were gone. But
yeah, well, that's
the biggest lesson you should say right now. Pay attention, everybody, to your own history.
Grab your phone. Yeah, if you're lucky enough to have family members who are older, ask them questions. Sit down. These phones that are forever in our hands, turn it around. get off of, Instagram and videotape your loved ones and ask them about their stories. And, if you're first generation, second generation, how they came to this country, why they came to this country, just about your family history, anything. Because after they're gone, it's really difficult. And that was the kind of the search that I went on after, I realized how extraordinary my grandmother's story was. I went on this years-long journey to try to find the family that she saved. And that was where my second book, Something Beautiful Happened, was born.
And to go back to the book signing.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. I'm all over the place.
That's okay.
So at the book signing, so I was at this book signing at the Kahila Kadosha Yanama Synagogue, and there's an extraordinary woman there, Marcia Konomopoulos, who is like the foremost world's expert on Greek Jewry. And Marcia had, I'd interviewed her. She was a tremendous source for me for both of my books on the Greek Jews, especially in Corfu. And at that point, I had contacted, after years of searching, tremendous search, the relatives, some of the relatives of the family that my grandmother saved. And Marcia was so moved and overwhelmed and overcome by this that she said that day, we are going to have a reunion. We are going to host these families. We're going to meet in Corfu and we're going to celebrate this story. Marcia has devoted her life to Holocaust studies and to the forgotten and untold stories of the Greek Jews, especially in the Holocaust. And so for a woman who has dedicated her life to these, 99.9% of the time, horrific, tragic stories, to be able to embrace a beautiful story that still resonated 70 years later, she saw the importance and the beauty immediately. Even when I could not, I was so, and she saw it immediately. She was like, oh, we're going. And she and the Friends of American Jewry hosted our reunion and made it all possible.
So when did you decide to go in search of Savas's family? What was there something that prompted your search?
Yeah, I'm like a stubborn Greek American journalist, right? So what could be, find someone who was more stubborn than that, more tenacious and stubborn and headstrong. So it became a challenge, so I wrote this novel. Could I write a novel? I wrote a novel. I was like, okay, what's next? What else could I challenge myself to do? And then I was like, wait a minute, it wasn't enough for me just to kind of fictionalize my grandmother's story. I was like, I'm a journalist. Okay, now I'm a novelist, but like I'm a journalist and I tell stories, and it was time to tell my family story. So I decided to take those skills, those investigative journalist skills that I've been working on my entire career, and focus them towards my own family story for a change. And I started digging in and researching. I went back to Greece. I went back to Corfu. I, dragged my family back to the Jewish quarter, knocked on doors, went to the synagogue. Do you know anything? Do you know anything? I asked all my relatives. I went back to Greece. Nothing. For years, it was just a series of dead ends. And then finally, I remembered that when I was in college, I had actually studied in Israel. As a journalism student, I went and did a journalism program there, and I visited Yad Vashem.
How lucky!
Yeah, I know. There are no, it's all. My favorite word in Yiddish. I don't speak Hebrew or Yiddish, but I do know beshert. And something drew me to Israel as an 18-year-old journalism student, and my family couldn't understand it at the time. All of my friends were going off to Florence and Paris, and I was like, no, I need to go to Israel, and I did, and I studied journalism there for a summer, and I visited Yad Vashem, and I remember walking through the Garden of the Righteous and seeing the trees and the plaques and being so overwhelmed, and because your family is there, right? Yep. And I remember being so overwhelmed at like these incredible stories of these people who sacrificed everything. But guess what? Never once, not once, did I remember or think about my grandmother's story. Again, I was a teenager. I was a college student. I wasn't thinking in that context. And it wasn't until years later as a mother that I was searching for the family that I remembered Yad Vashem. And I wrote to them, and we corresponded for about a year, and it was dead end after dead end. And it wasn't until I was able to cobble together a little bit of information that Yad Vashem found for me, along with the incredible, incredible help that I received from the entire organization at MyHeritage. MyHeritage is an Israeli-based company. They're a genealogy company, and their researchers and the founder of the company heard about my story And Gilad Yafet, who's actually the founder and CEO of MyHeritage, dived in personally and put his incredible, like brilliant genealogical and investigative skills and helped me. Actually, he was the one who really kind of cracked the case and was able to lead us to the first family member.
Which was Michelle, correct?
Yes. So Michelle is a granddaughter. Yeah.
April 10th of.
So yes. So April 10th of 2014, we finally, found the first family member. And, as I mentioned, I'm a mom. At this point, I had 2 children. My daughter was 12. My son was 9. And I remember, because they had watched me for years searching and searching. And I remember saying to them, like, look where you come from. We found them. Look what your great grandmother did. There are people alive today because of what she did. Goodness prevailed. Always stand up. Always do the right thing, because look what happened. Your illiterate, poor, impoverished great grandmother, she beat the Nazis. Goodness won. The Nazis were beaten. Goodness prevailed, and the Nazis were sent packing. The Nazis were sent home. And then that was April 10th of 2014. And then on April 13th of 2014, as you saw in the video, our family was absolutely devastated by a senseless, horrific act of violence when a white supremacist neo-Nazi in Kansas murdered 2 members of our family, my 14-year-old nephew, Reet, and his grandfather, Bill, because he thought they were Jewish. He saw them pull into a JCC parking lot where Reet was going for a singing audition that day. Bill, his grandfather, was driving them. And he saw them pull in, and because they were at a JCC, he assumed they were Jewish, and he shot and killed them both.
I mean, that story in and of itself is so horrific. And then, 3 days prior to that, how did you process the convergence of those sort of stories? And did Reet's mom and Bill's daughter, Mindy, help you sort of?
Everyone helped. This is, I say this all the time, I physically put the words on paper, but this book is very much a collaborative effort, and it's our book. It's our story. Every member of our family, every extended member, every person who helped me research, every person who was kind enough to speak with me, everyone helped. Because you can't make sense of the senseless. The seed for this book truly, though, was a conversation that I had with my son, Nico, who then was 9. The night that Bill and Reet were killed, again, mind you, I had been telling my children, the Nazis are gone, the goodness won, your great grandmother won, and then 3 days later, we had to tell them that a neo-Nazi murdered their cousin. So, how do you explain that to a child? As I say in the book, how do you wrap your head around the fact that, tragic irony is not reserved merely for Shakespearean plot twists. It's real life. And so, the night that Reet and Bill were killed, I remembered climbing into bed with my son, Nico, who was 9. And he turned to me and he said, "But I don't understand, Mom." And he said, "How could this happen? You told me the Nazis were gone." And so that just kind of stayed with me and resonated. And I knew that it was my job, right? We're mothers, we're parents. It's our jobs to help our children understand things, difficult things, things that we sometimes don't understand. I certainly don't understand this. And I wrestled with it, and it's funny because you've asked, Alan, like, what was the moment? What was the moment? This took a really long time to kind of germinate into an idea for a book, because you have to, at least I had to wrestle with it. It's too much. It's too big to process. And there's the how and the why and the what, and there's grief and real pain. And you kind of have to sort through all of those emotions before you could even, or I could even fathom, like, I knew it happened for a reason. I knew that the tragic irony was just like incredible. There must have been some reason, something, but I couldn't make any sense of it. And it wasn't until kind of all these pieces started coming together, and it was over a year. It was a solid year later, that more than a year later, about maybe 15 or 16 months later, that I resigned myself to, okay, I need to really tell this story.
How long after you found Michelle first, which is Spera's granddaughter, right?
Spera's granddaughter, right.
And then you found Rosa's sons.
Right.
And
so
how long after finding all of them did the ceremony in Greece take place?
The following summer. So we found Michelle in April, and then I had started, like, we thought we knew where Rosa's sons were. They live in Israel. There are actually 5 members of that family, 2 sons and 3 grandchildren. So there are 5 people alive in Israel today because of what happens in Arakusa.
But that's a great story too, though, because when you were talking to them, one of the granddaughters remembered, because most of the people who were hidden didn't talk about this to anybody after the war, and a lot of Jewish people who suffered through the Holocaust did not talk about this after the war. It took important, I think for my parents, Schindler's List helped them open up more.
Right.
There are certain things, but she did open up to her granddaughter, and that's the key. Like we were talking earlier about sharing the stories, but if you have kids, grandkids, talk to them. Write it down, because that helped you piece part of it together, right?
Exactly. So when we found Rosa's sons, everything, we pressed pause when Reed and Bill were killed. Everything just came to an end, to a stop. And it was several weeks later that I was able to finally go back in and say, okay, we need to finish this. And so we did, and we found Rosa's 2 sons in Israel. And when I reached out, at first they were like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? Because Rosa was not, so I want to go back to Rosa for a moment. She was not one of Savas's daughters. At the time of the Holocaust, she was 9 years old. She was a cousin of Savas's family, a cousin of Savas's girls. Her family lived within the Jewish quarter, and they were all taken away by the Nazis. Rosa happened to be with Savas's girls at the time, so he took her in and managed to bring her to Arakusa. She actually little Rosa was with one of the daughters. We found out later in my research when I went back to Israel, she was actually delivering garments on Arakusa when the Nazis rounded up the Jews, and she was told by the islanders of Arakusa, it's not safe, don't go back. And then Savas's girls were able to join. We found that out a couple of years later. But anyway, when I first found Rosa's sons, they were like, what are you talking about? She was so traumatized by what happened, obviously. She never, ever spoke of it. Her sons told me that on Holocaust Remembrance Day, they had to stay in the house mournfully, prayerfully all day, and pray for their family who were lost, but they never knew who they were praying for because she never told them. And it wasn't until we found them and were able to piece together the missing pieces of their history that these 2 sons realized exactly what happened and why their mother was so traumatized. In fact, you saw in the trailer when I say that's Savas, that's him. I am on Skype in my office in Manhattan, and they were on Skype in Israel, in Rehovot, where they lived. And my friend from MyHeritage, who was with them when we did the Skype so we could first meet, recognized a portrait that was hanging on the wall. At this point, remember, we had found Savas's daughter's family in Los Angeles. So at this point, we had a photo of Savas, and I
in Los Angeles and also in the entertainment industry, which is
exactly. Crazy small world. So he took the portrait off the wall, put it up to the TV screen, and asked the sons, do you know who this is? And they said, we don't know who that man is. We just know that he was very special to my mother, and she always had his portrait, and so we kept it on the wall. And so when they lifted it up, I was able to identify. I was like, that's Savas Israel. And it was in that moment that Rosa's sons finally knew who this portrait, and why he was so important to her all those years.
I mean, it gets me.
Yeah,
all the time. Crazy. And then a year later, you're in Greece meeting Michelle.
Yes.
And Rosa's family for the first time. What is that experience? Bringing, first of all, I mean, It is because of you. It is because of Marcia.
Yeah.
That you're bringing all of these people together in Greece, for a part of their story that they really didn't know.
Imagine the leap of faith. Like literally, we call them out of the blue. Hi, we have like a secret life of your mothers that you don't know about, and they were like, "What?" And the leap of faith to like actually listen to us. I mean, how many telemarketers do I hang up on daily who are like, "We have information for you. Click."
Yeah.
But like they actually believed us, and not only that, but they got on a plane and came to meet us in Greece. I mean. They got on planes and they came to Greece with their entire families. And then they got on this tiny boat with me, where half the people got seasick. I mean, it was awful. It was awful. And we land on Arakusa and miraculously everybody starts feeling better. And we were able to hold a ceremony on Arakusa with all of our families together in the place where their mothers were saved, honoring the islanders and celebrating this beautiful, untold story. Imagine everyone had died, everyone had passed away at this point. And so this story, this beautiful, poignant, so important story would have been lost to history, but we managed to bring everyone together and to celebrate it and to celebrate them.
Well, and they were presented in Greece with the Award of Moral Courage, right?
Yes.
For the islanders of Arakusa.
Yes, by the International Royal Wallenberg Foundation, yes. I'm sorry, by the Award of Moral Courage by the Association of Friends Jewelry, yes.
Right, they got the House of Life plaque from the International Royal
Wallenberg.
I mean, the emotions for all of you, can you put it into words?
Oh, I mean, it was incredibly emotional on so many levels. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. I mean, it was a stifling hot day, under the Greek sun. And it was terribly hot and we were melting, but no one cared. It was beautiful. There was such emotion. At one point, Rosa's youngest granddaughter, Mayan, stood up and she, read something that she had written about what an honor it was for her and her family to be on Arakusa with, the family of Avgerini, who was my grandmother, who helped save her mother, her grandmother, and just what an honor it was to be there. And I was able to welcome them home because that is their home as much as it's my home. And it was just incredibly moving and it meant so much to us and to everyone. It's
Yeah, well, it's so interesting too, because you were there with your two children.
Yeah.
And they were there with theirs, which I think that, some of the people that you talk about in the book and met in the book, Jacqueline, I'm not going to remember everybody's name. Sonia, is it Sonia?
Sonia Warshawski, yeah.
Yeah, it's Jacqueline, but some of them all, Sonia's story, but all talk about that sort of the children are the future and sharing the history with, making sure they know the history. I mean, what are you able to sort of know what your children took from that whole experience?
Yes, a lot. I mean, it was life-changing for all of us. I think that is what I am, one of the things, because there's so many things I'm so proud of by everyone who came together and helped and how everyone worked together. I mean, around the world, honestly, to kind of, no benefit to them, but they just wanted to honor this, these people who did such a beautiful thing in such a dark time. But for me and for my children, it was life-changing for them and for us, because it really, number one, it showed them to never, ever, ever, ever give up, ever. When you have a vision, a dream, when you have a goal, you chase it and you don't stop chasing it until you've achieved it. And they saw that. They saw that in me. They saw it from the beginning of my story. From when the Cyprus Whispers, I wrote that book and I was rejected for 3 solid years of rejection after rejection, and never thought I would see it published. And I thought it was the biggest waste of time. And my kids saw that. They saw every time I got upset, every time I thought it would never be published. And then they saw the joy of when that one person finally said yes. And then they saw the tenacity it took to write the second book. And then they saw the tenacity it took to find the family and bring them together, and all of the hurdles. I cannot even begin to tell you how many times I just wished the thing would be canceled. I wish someone like cooler heads would prevail and come in and say, this whole thing is canceled. It's never going to happen. You're never going to pull this off. Because it was before the planning of it, all of it. It was
well, I know
so
you were also because you were also really nervous about that you had overstepped your bounds by because Rosa and all of Rosas' children didn't really talk about the Holocaust or about your grandmother, you know, the people who saved them on Arakusa, that you felt you were intruding on that sort of story.
I felt like maybe this, you know, this was not my story to tell. Who was I? You know, these women chose not to speak. They chose not to tell their own children about the Holocaust and what happened and how they survived in their own families. And what right did I have to step in and overstep and share this story? You know, what right do I have to, you know, they decided to share, you know, very few facts of their lives. Who was I to come in and change their family's history? Who was I, you know, who am I to rewrite the Holocaust books? Who am I to, you know, kind of put a spotlight on the fact that, you know, there's little to nothing known about the Greek Jews of Corfu, and, you know, that's Marcia's life work. Who am I to come in and tell this story? I'm no expert. And it was very challenging. And it was something that I wrestled with of like, you know, I don't want to overstep here. This is not my story to tell. But then I realized that I had a responsibility, and maybe, and as to what we were talking about before, maybe that's one of the reasons why this happened to me, to our family, the timing of it. You know, I don't want to sound all, you know, woo-woo, but maybe there is a reason that it happened to me and to us. And, you know, maybe I have a responsibility to tell this story.
We have to, you know, you talk about it a lot in the book. It's something I talk about a lot. We have to learn from the past.
Yeah.
You know, the two words that you share in the book quite a bit, never forget. You know, I mean, those are, you know, really important things when you're talking about something as difficult as this. And I know faith plays such a large part. Your grandmother, Mindy, you yourself, when Mindy was sick, when you were over in Greece. What did you learn from Mindy? You know, and watching her go through what she went through after Reet and Bill were tragically killed.
You know, I'm still learning about Mindy because she is just, every day I learn and am in awe of her and what she has done and how she carries herself in this strength. You know, and it's funny because people ask me all the time, like, where does she find this strength? How does Mindy do this? How does Mindy do what she does? And I've asked her too. I'm like, how are you doing all this? Because she's extraordinary. You know, she has lived through, you know, she lost her child. What is more devastating than losing your child? You know, losing your child and your father. And she was so incredibly close with both. But the grace and the strength that Mindy has shown, and also how she is channeling her grief and her pain into helping others, into ensuring that others, hopefully, God willing, will never have to suffer through what she and her family suffered through. You know, when you mentioned faith, and faith is a very, very, very big part of Mindy's story, and I'm not going to tell it for her. She will tell it herself
join me
when she's on the show. You know, you can certainly read about it in the book. But faith is, you know, the fact that, and I've asked her this many times, and Mindy knows. She knows that she's going to see her child again. She knows that she'll see Reed again. She knows that she's going to see her father again. And that is such a comfort. And, you know, that faith and that just unequivocal knowledge and belief that we're temporarily separated, but we will be reunited. You know, there is such comfort in that for her. And anyone who sees her and sees this is, I think it shows the strength and the grace and the beauty of having such deep faith.
And your grandmother seemed to have it, right?
Oh yeah, very much.
How do you,
Very much
if I
so.
say it wrong, but Saint Spider, how do you say
Spiriton.
it? Saint
Spiriton.
Spiriton.
Yeah. Saint Spiriton is the patron saint of Corfu, which is the main island that we're all from. And his mummified remains are in a silver casket in a beautiful church in the center of Corfu, just steps away from the Jewish quarter. And he is revered, and he is worshipped, and he is, most importantly, beloved by anyone and everyone with ties to Corfu. I mean, we truly believe that Saint Spiriton protects us and watches over anyone with roots in Corfu. And we have many, many miracles attributed to Saint Spiriton. And, you know, it's deep. And many people say that what happened on Arakusa during the war, that, you know, that Savas and his daughters and little Rosa all survived, was another miracle of Saint Spiriton.
Really is something else. Well, you know, I know there's been so much talk about, because of Facebook, and that there are still in 2020 people who try to deny that the Holocaust even existed.
I just don't even understand that.
I mean, it's really, yeah, it's something I don't either. I mean, you know, why would that even be a subject for anybody to discuss, you know, and to deny? You know, you and I have, you know, such rich truths in the fact that this happened to our families, you know. So
I just don't understand. It's kind of like and obviously this is not, we're not going to get into politics, but it's sort of, you know, it's like, I mean, come on, people.
That we didn't win the election, is that what you?
I mean, come on,
right.
You know.
Right. Well, you know, that's interesting. You know, not that I was going to get into the subject, but it's an interesting thought about, because I think those dangerous, you know, you think of what happened to Reet and Bill, neo-Nazis, somebody who's still believing in this ridiculousness, who wanted to know what it felt like to kill a Jewish person, is unfathomable. Right. But to me, when we're spewing lies and mistruths that are dangerous to us as human beings living in this country, to me,
hasn't that been the past 4 years?
And yes, and to some degree, but I think it has to be, I think there has to be accountability to lies that are dangerous to us and, you know, fellow Americans, you know, in that respect. You know, I'm not trying to get political, but I do mean anybody who's spewing lies and that puts a dangerous spin on something that really can hurt people. There should be accountability somewhere.
Absolutely, 100%.
You know, that,
no question.
You know,
well, also, I mean, again, you know, this we're not here to discuss politics, but you know, we also have seen the danger in normalizing white supremacy, the danger in normalizing this type of hate, not only hate crimes, but hate speech. There is absolute danger in normalizing this behavior. You know, when Reet and Bill were killed in 2014, you know, they were still operating in the shadows, on the fringes of society, and, you know, and now they are marching freely in the streets of our country. And I don't understand how that is accepted behavior in this country or anywhere around the world. I just don't. I'm all for free speech. There's no question, but I'm not for hate speech and crimes.
Right. I completely agree. That's how I've been talking about this lately, is I totally believe in our First Amendment right. But it's when your First Amendment, you know, lies is not sort of freedom of speech, and speech that can cause people to harm other people. That's when you've crossed a line.
Right.
So we were talking about, because I didn't know the sort of timeline of you writing Something Beautiful Happened. And I was so surprised that you were actually writing your third book, right? When you, when the publisher was with you in Greece and saw all of this happen.
So when we were all in Greece on this reunion, my editor at the time, her name was Claire Wachtel, She's a legendary editor at HarperCollins with the Harper imprint, and she was my editor on my first book. And she came because she just loved the story and was so excited by it. And honestly, had she not published my first book, I don't know that I ever would have, searched for the family. There would have been no reason to. So she really was a very big part of this puzzle as well, or just, another inspiration for me, and one of the incredible group of people that came together to help. And so we were in Greece, and it was the day after the reunion, and we were all just on cloud nine, and it was incredible. And I remember I was so pent up energy. I just needed to go for a run. It was like running out, going for a run in Corfu. I was walking out the door of the hotel, and she grabbed me, and she was like, I was like, yes, it was amazing. She goes, I was working on another novel. She grabbed me, she goes, put down the fiction. You must write this book. And so I did. I put down the fiction. I put down the novel I was working on, and I dug in and I started working on this book. And now I'm back and just finished, how many years later, just finished the first draft of that novel that she told me to put down.
a lot of years later. That's what's so amazing. What is the third book about?
Third book is called Mon Repos, which is a beautiful former royal villa in Corfu. Also, this book is also based in Corfu. And it is takes place mostly during the Greek Civil War. And it is, like my first book, steeped in a lot of untold Greek history, this time the Greek Civil War, and some incredible Greek unknown or little known Greek mythology. And it is the story of two families from very different backgrounds, one royal, one peasant, impoverished, and their magical tie to this royal villa of Mon Repos, and a promise made from a royal princess to her maid that both haunts and inspires both families for generations.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was this a story told to you as well, or something you just went and did some research on?
It's actually inspired by, years ago when I was working in Fox News, I worked with someone who was a member of the Greek royal family, and our relationship and our friendship and what I learned about him and his family inspired me to tell this story.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Talk about what Arakusa means to you.
Oh, I mean, it's home. It's home. It's where I spent, it's just this magical, simple, primitive Greek island where I spent the, greatest summers of my life, all my cousins and, assorted aunts and uncles and donkeys and, just wonderful, clean, fun, beach all day, Greek dancing and, drinking with friends all night, and it's just the best.
Have you been back since the ceremony?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, I went back with Mindy. She came back also.
Did.
Yeah, she came to visit also.
Was that her first time to see it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's
amazing. Yeah, I've been back several times, but Mindy came on one of the trips with her family too. So that was really special.
Great. I hope Savas's family or
They have. So they went back one last time. So we were all there for the reunion, and then they went back about 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, that's amazing, because I wondered that, because you said it in your speech that you hope this becomes a place for them as well.
Yes. Yeah, and it has, and it is. And I've also gone to Israel to spend time with them. I was actually just I was there in December for the Hebrew launch of Something Beautiful Happened, which was wonderful. And we had a wonderful party and celebration, bunch of TV interviews. But I think the best part of the trip was just Shabbat dinner with the family. Just a beautiful, quiet dinner at home, which I loved, and that to me was the highlight of the trip. And then I've been back to Israel again before that as well. We all went and gathered together. This was maybe 3 years ago. Michelle, son, was bar mitzvahed at the Western Wall, and we all were able to go and gather together and celebrate the bar mitzvah at the Western Wall, and that was just amazing.
Wow. Oh,
yeah.
I have chills. Yeah. It was interesting in the book and your story, because you grew up in a very Jewish community, and I did not. And
wow.
and I grew up in a town in New Jersey, just it wasn't to me, and maybe it's hard to know because when your parents aren't fully talking about the Holocaust, I don't know. In my eye, for me, I was gay and I was Jewish, and I didn't talk about either one of them.
Wow.
And I love how you wanted to go to Hebrew school. I did not. And I think it was because I did. I wasn't going with a lot of kids in my own class. Class. So it was so interesting, that parallel.
Yeah.
How you.
Well, yeah, I wanted to be like everyone else. Like we were so not like anybody else. I mean, we were, I grew up in Urshel. It was very Jewish. All my friends were Jewish. They all went to Hebrew school. I went to Greek school. I hated every second of it. I speak Greek. We spoke Greek at home, but it was like, I wanted to be with my friends. I write about this and I speak about it all the time. It's like, my friends had these really cute grandmothers who like went to Bloomingdale's and Macy's and like, wintered in Boca, and my yaya, was from this tiny Greek island. She dressed in black. She made weird food. She didn't speak English. She was amazing, but she was not gonna, she never drove a car in her life. She wasn't gonna take me to Bloomingdale's to go shopping or for frozen yogurt. It was a very different experience than my friends. I wanted the Brady Bunch. I wanted to go to the Grand Canyon, like the Brady Bunch. We were never going to go to the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, neither was I. I can't thank you enough for doing this. Will you just stay here while I want to share,
Sure.
sort of what I was going to say about why I wanted to start conversations with Alan. I know I mentioned earlier that I would share more about my reasons for starting this series of conversations. I am the child of not one, but two Holocaust survivors, and did not truly and fully understand or grasp the scope of what my parents lived through during World War II until I was about 28 years old. There are people today spewing lies and trying to deny that the Holocaust ever happened. And it was this moment that I'm going to play right now.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Blood and soil! 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 Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets?
And it was truly seeing those events unfold that took place at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017, when hundreds of white nationalists, alt-righters with neo-Nazis who were marching and chanting, "Jews will not replace us," scared me to death. I could not believe what I was witnessing 72 years after World War II had ended. Seeing these events unfold before my eyes and the death of Heather Heyer lit something inside me. This was the first time that I was happy to say that neither of my parents were still alive to see what was happening in the world around us. I really couldn't imagine sitting there with my mother and father while they were watching men holding tiki torches screaming that Jews will not replace us so many years after they lost so much during World War II. My grandfather and my aunt, along with many other family members, were killed at the hand of the Nazis. After witnessing the Charlottesville scene, I felt the need to use my voice where my parents no longer could. My parents knew and understood that anti-Semitism still existed. But as you witnessed tonight in our conversation, hate for no other reason than to hate still exists all over our country, from Kansas to Charlottesville to Pittsburgh, to name just a few of the horrific recent anti-Semitic attacks still happening today. It really is insane to me that it has been 75 years since World War II, and that we have yet to rid the world of Hitler's propaganda and his violence, especially here in the United States of America. This is why I wanted to start this series. I wanted to have a series of conversations that make us all think about our place in history. Remember, history is all around us, as Yvette and I spoke about. In the next episode, I plan to share my story, a similar story to Yvette, but this time it's a story that I tell is how my mother and father were the lucky ones to be saved by a number of Christian people who risked not only their own lives, but the lives of their entire families to save the people they did not know. I have them to thank for being here today and to be able to share my parents' story and make sure we never forget. I mean, you know, it's so similar. That's why I was so drawn to it. It's, you know, it's hard to see that it is still happening all around us.
That's very difficult to watch. How many times have we seen that video? And every time I see it, it's shocking and it's disturbing and emotional, and it's infuriating.
Yeah, and I have conversations with people who don't think that's not what was happening there. And I try to make them watch the full, you know, video. And sadly that our president did not denounce what happened there. Because
again and again and again.
Right. And that's where it, you know, enables or gives people license to do the unthinkable.
Right. Right. Yeah. We have to have a zero tolerance policy across the board.
We really do. And I'm going to put up your website one more time so people can go. Please read Yvette's books, When the Cyprus Whispers and Something Beautiful Happened. Yvette, thank you. It means so much that you did this. I can't wait.
Thank you, Alan.
Do you have a date for the third book yet?
Not yet. Not yet. We're getting there.
I know you were stressing over getting it done, so I understand. Well, you take care, and thanks again, and hopefully we can see each other. I appreciate you doing this.
Stay well. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into the first series of Conversations with Alan. Don't forget, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel right below. There's a little bell you can turn on so you get notified of all the shows coming up. I appreciate you tuning in. Have a great evening, everybody. Bye-bye.